Okay, welcome back. I'm going to include in my perspective discussion the pastoral or faith-based perspective. It doesn't matter what faith, for the purposes of this, it doesn't matter what faith we're talking about, but a faith in a higher power. If my existence and my understanding of myself comes from my belief in that higher power, then I would, as a counselor perhaps, or a psychologist, I would follow the pastoral or the faith-based perspective. And the faith-based perspective has some very stark contrasts with Freud, with behaviorism, with the existential and humanistic perspectives, and I just included the counters to existential and humanistic. Faith-based perspectives are kind of anti-existential because the belief is humans have intrinsic worth. We are born something. It's not dependent upon what we do. We are who we are and thus have value. Humans have clear and discoverable purposes. That's the faith-based perspective, that we were born with a purpose already in mind, or purposes. That human beings are not alone, that we're not isolated, we don't have to isolate, that our higher power is with us, and that other people in our boat and of our belief system are with us. And then certainly, counter to death anxiety, those within the faith-based perspective don't see death as the end. Therefore, my anxiety over my death is limited somewhat to loss of my belongings, loss of my place here in the world, and the loss of my family members when I do die. But of course, the belief being in most faiths that there's something after life, something better after life. It's also counter-humanistic, and humanism says human beings are the end-all be-all force, the end-all be-all source of all hope. Faith-based perspective says humans aren't central, that God or the higher power is central, and that we're born, part of our purpose is to serve our God. Also counter-humanistic, that we're designed to be dependent, not independent, and this is a sticking point for many individuals. Certainly here in our American culture, we seek to be independent and not mastered by anybody. However, in a faith-based perspective, certainly in the Judeo-Christian perspective, we are encouraged to be dependent upon God for our strength and our faith and our health and our livelihood. Kind of takes the pressure off of an individual who feels like it's all on their shoulders. Let's move on to physiological and evolutionary perspective. Physiological psychology focuses on how my brain creates my reality. So what are the functions of the brain and the chemicals in the brain that allow me to think and reason and believe and hope, and that cause depression and create anxiety. That's a physiological perspective. So they spent a lot of time looking at fancy pictures of the brain like this one and pointing out various structures, looking for errors, looking for problems in brain structure that might lead towards problematic behavior, problematic emotions. Evolutionary perspective looks at heredity and genetics. What do I inherit from my parents as far as my psychology, as far as my personality? And along with physiological, the chemical balances. What chemical imbalances cause depression? And then last but not least, we move to the cognitive perspective, which is now pretty much the gold standard in treatment of psychological disorders. The cognitive perspective says that through cognition, through controlling our thoughts, through learning to think more effectively and sometimes more positively, but certainly more realistically about my situation, I can thereby control my feelings And since my feelings are linked in with my motivation and behavior, I can control my behavior by controlling my own thoughts. So we have this formula, which you'll see several times. This is the way the brain works. It thinks things, those thoughts prompt feelings, those feelings beget behavior. So if I think I'm going to do well in a certain class, that will lead to a feeling of happiness and hopefulness within that class, which leads me to work hard. When I encounter a difficulty, I'll work through it because I have hope. I believe I'm going to do well. If, on the other hand, I walk into any situation with the belief or the thought, I'm not going to handle this, I can't do this, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, that automatically creates a feeling, because my brain goes off of what it hears me think and it believes what I think. I automatically enter into that situation with a sense of hopelessness and futility and fear. And this can lead people to stop trying, to give up. If I can't do it, and all of a sudden, if I believe I can't do it and I feel hopeless, and I come upon a struggle, a particularly hard concept or chapter, then I'm more likely to give up. Well, I knew I couldn't do it. I might as well give up. This is not an assignment that you have to complete, but just as a way of review, you can use this slide to see the various perspectives that we covered. Remember, I asked you to identify a problem. You might briefly, as you're preparing for the exam, think through each of these perspectives. Imagine that you take your problem to a psychodynamic theorist, a behavioral theorist, an existential theorist, the same problem. How would a psychodynamic theorist explain and try to help you through that problem? And then next, how would a behavioral theorist see that same problem, and what might they try to do to help you resolve it? I think this can be a very effective way to wrestle with these differences. All right, we are going to move on to the second half of the chapter. I'm going to briefly, as briefly as I can, cover research methods, the different types of research in psychology, and I'm going to do that when I come back.